Hello everyone, welcome to Kishore Chess Mentor. We are seeing a series of how to attack in chess. We have already done three parts, and this is the fourth part of it. And today, let's take a minute to understand this position. So far, in all the three games, like whatever we have seen, it is the target is e6, be it like the pawn is there on e6 or the pawn is not there on e6. So even there is an object or not, the target is on e6. And the similar thing what we have seen from the last three positions, one similarity is there. That is the king is still in the center. And when we say the king is still in the center, that gives us an opportunity to attack, to initiate the attack. And this position is quite different. The reason being like the knight is still held up at d4 and the pawn is already threatening it. So, I mean, the knight is quite pinned, the queen is pinned. Okay, so the knight has to move or it has to take the pawn. And when we look at this position, when we take the pawn, okay, so there are a couple of options. The first thing is to safeguard the pawn, okay, to safeguard the knight, we exchange the pawn and then bishop into, and again it's a pin right now because this knight is being guarded by the queen and the knight, whereas this knight is being attacked by queen, knight, and the bishop, which means that he is lead in attack by one. So we have to support it by c3, and this is quite forced. And the reason being the queen is pinned, and now d6. The reason for d6 is that the bishop has to get developed. The bishop is there at c8 and it is doing nothing, and the rooks has to get connected, and the king has to castle. So in order to start that, he goes with d6, and now the position is quite equal. And we cannot say that we are going to attack, initiate an attack or something like that, because when the queen goes to g5 and tries to attack, let's say the g7, it is not under attack because the bishop is there at e5. It is protecting the g7. So having said that, this is quite an equal position, and so what can be the initiate the move that which leads to initiative? So the thing is, we have that indicator of king being the center, and he is sacrificing his knight. Okay, so I mean the piece activity, right? So he's sacrificing his knight. So I mean like he can start the attack, pawn into knight, and queen into g7, attacking the rook. So now he has to play rook f8, and now e5. So when you see that the sequence of moves are giving our attack to the opponent, and I mean like giving some forcing moves to the opponent, so that like he has to, we are dictating the terms. I mean white is dictating the terms here. So bishop e7, f5, and for f5 it's obvious that he is going to move f6. So black will stop with f6 and say knight f4. And one thing which we need to note down here is that, I mean, with limited amount of resources, if you go for an attack, let's say with two pieces or so, and sometimes like it won't be sufficient. So we need to pull in additional resources in order to wait for the attack. And for knight f4, rook f7, and pawn f2. This is a very interesting move because like the rook queen is under attack, and I mean like he is not taking his queen anywhere else. So pawn f2. So in case if he rushes to take rook into g7, pawn f2, and again the thing is, it's obvious that the pawn is quite, I mean like has gone a long way through, and it's just one move away from getting queen, and king f7. So the pawn on g7 has to be supported, f6. So now what? I mean the pawn on g7 is supported as well as the bishop on e7 is under attack. Bishop into f6, knight into h5. So now the bishop is, I mean the king is pinned and the bishop cannot move, and the pawn is also getting supported here. So the next thing is, to be an interesting one, I think like he can also sacrifice bishop into, I mean rook into f6. Okay, in case of this position, he can take rook into f6 as well, and king goes to g8, or let's say king goes to g8, then rook goes to f8, and then pawn to g8 queens. So this is one of the possibility. And in addition to that, there are many other options as well. Say the bishop can also go to h7 and protect that g8 square, and bishop can also go to c4 and protect the g8 square and promote the pawn. Okay, so these things are there. And the worst part about the black here is that black needs two moves to develop this bishop. So meaning, I mean like if I go to bishop h7, the bishop cannot straight away go to f5 and say like the g8 is guarded, because it needs to move this d pawn, and then like it needs to move the bishop, and then only like he can say like the g8 is guarded. So having said that, let's go to the other variation. And here, let's say knight e5. The idea behind knight e5 is that, say he wanted to support his rook, and I mean there are a couple of things that which it is doing, supporting the rook as well as protecting the g6 square. So protecting the g6 square meaning like in some of the variations that the queen can go to g6 and give a check, and the knight on e5 is guarding it. So what happens here is that, so having understood that, white tries to deflect the knight by bishop c4. So the knight goes and takes c4, and now what happens? Queen here check, and then for let's say rook f8, queen g6 check. So if the knight was there at e5, then this wouldn't have happened. The queen cannot go to g6. So now rook f7. So now knight d5. So here queen d6, pawn into, and for pawn into it is queen into knight, pawn here. So the next thing is, it's quite obvious that the queen is going to go to g8 and it's a checkmate, and the pawns are quite advanced and the rook is pinned. Rook cannot take either of the pawns, let's say e7 or f6, because it is pinned, and queen g8, it's going to be a checkmate. So here, okay, let's take a moment to get back to the position. Okay, so queen g3, pawn into queen here. Okay, f6 knight here, rook here, pawn into. And here, instead of rook into g7, what about knight e5? Straight away. So bishop c4, this is what we saw. And for bishop f8, instead of rook f8, it was bishop f8. And for bishop f8, it is say knight into h5. And what happens here is that I think like he is going to go with the flank. And also, you know what? The move for knight e5 here is that, see, the most important thing is not only supporting f7 and say like defending the g6. The most important thing is we need to expose the king which is sitting in the center file. Right? So I mean like the knight and the bishop are already like protecting it. So we need to expose the king. So what happens here is that the knight going to c4 not only like leaves the g6 behind, it also leaves the king on e8 behind. So the file is quite open now, and say knight here and rook here check. So rook here, queen here. So the idea being like queen into f1, checkmate. So rook again goes to here, and queen here, knight here. So the thing is, queen goes to d5 in order to protect the rook on say f7. Okay, so knight goes here and queen goes to a2. The queen is still guarding the rook on f7. Okay, so but there is a move like this, which is deflecting the queen's path of defending the rook on f7. So now let's say d into e6, rook into rook, knight into. So it comes with the tempo. Which one to capture, the bishop or the knight? You capture the bishop first because it comes with a check, and then the king moves, and then queen into knight, it comes with a check, and then the king moves, and then pawn into. So I mean like it is now white who has to decide like how many two queens like he has to take now. Okay, so quite an interesting position, right? So here in this position, so we need to understand that, I mean, there are certain things like which we need to see here. So deflecting the pieces which are guarding it, okay, deflecting the pieces whichever it is guarding, and that leads to checkmate like this. Okay, so deflecting here, and let's say pawn into d6 is what we saw right now, and there is one more move, queen into e6. And if it was queen into d6, pawn into, rook into, and the most important part is rook goes to f7, and the f8 is now hanging. Okay, so if the knight takes this one, I think like you can pretty much straightforwardly move this one. Let's say if knight takes this, okay, there's a brilliant move here, because the bishop is pinned and the king has to move, and then you can take the other queen as well. So quite an interesting position, right? So the thing about we learn about from this position is that there are attack for white. Okay, I mean like there is an attack that black is trying to do, and the piece is about to lose, and instead of worrying about losing the pieces, okay, he is seeing some other moves like where he can keep up the initiative. Okay, let's say for example, if I wanted to keep up this knight and say like play f into e5, bishop into, and then pawn here, what happens is that this bishop on c8, okay, it just needs one move to get developed, and the next move I'm going to do castles. Okay, so no one is going to stop me there, right? So this is the most important thing that which we need to understand, that when king is in the center, as long as it stays in the center, it is not guaranteed that it will stay in the center. We need to put the king down to the center, and we need to see the moves, and we shouldn't let the king to run off with the castles or something. So thanks for watching the video. If you like the video, you can like, comment, and subscribe. And if you wanted to see more videos like this, you can subscribe to my channel, Kishore Chess Mentor. Thank you so much.